Good morning, everyone. I would welcome to day 2 of the CIDCI forum. And first, I'd like to just again welcome everyone and say good morning. I understand it's also good afternoon for many of you, so I really appreciate that and appreciate the fact that you're able to join us. Again, this is another very important day, both for CIDCI and certainly for our followers. So I think everyone knows that these forums are every day during this week, and they're an hour and a half, and we continue to be in this Zoom format, at least for this time being. So my name is Stuart Eckblad. I'm one of the founders, and I am chair of CIDCI. And again, I'd love to welcome you to this session today. So a little bit of our history: the Center for Innovation in Design and Construction Industry. We got started approximately about 8 years ago or so. We are a small group here located, headquartered in San Francisco, although we actually have now a lot of reach across actually the globe. And so we have had an opportunity to really grow from a very small group to a large group of very interested participants. So we have continued to focus on creating a collaborative and interdisciplinary group. And we are made up of owners, architects, engineers, product, industry, different leaders, academics. Again, we're trying very hard to be a very diverse group representing a broad range of the industry that we work in. Just a reminder, so simply our mission. So CIDCI is a catalyst to improve the built environment and to inspire innovation. So our mission is to facilitate the exchange of ideas, knowledge, and insights to address challenges and opportunities. So with that as our, that's our, to go forward, that's how we move forward. So we have, and this year has been an important year in our building our board to really be affect actually that larger universe. So about 18 months ago, we shifted to Zoom presentation and certainly as responding to COVID as everyone has had to make that pivot. So we have been able to record or to hold about 30 sessions, sessions that we invite people and certainly everyone that's interested to come to our sessions and continue on and participate in these. Things that we have discussed, for example, is how to remove slavery from the supply chain, building decarbonization, how to create a marketplace for innovation, the circular economy, how innovative women are reshaping the world of design and construction, and really much, much more. So we hope that you're following us in our newsletters and as we go forward, and you'll see us and you'll be able to hear more about us. So, and we would look forward to any participation that you would like to get involved in some way. So we also have, in addition to those salons, we hold and sponsor an innovation lab for emerging leaders that help a number of companies respond to business challenges, particularly in COVID-19. So I'm going to introduce you quickly to our board of directors, and starting with Dean Reed, Howard Ashcraft, Zig Rubel, Larry Hillman, Ian McLaren, Troy Thompson, Patricia Tillman, Rebecca Snelling, Samiha Ergen, Tiet Lee, and KP Redding. And I think you see their pictures, and hopefully you know many of those individuals. And if not, please contact them and understand how they participate and why they participate in CIDCI, and bring the leadership for us in the industry. So again, we would love to hear from you. And I just want to remind you that CIDCI is it's a free organization, so all the participation is without a cost. Of course, the sponsorship is very important to us, and to that end, we can't thank our sponsors enough, and today specifically for Bosch and their support for this event. So thank you very much, and as a personal thank you. So as we know, this particular day is second day of 5 days. So today we're moving on with innovation partner failure, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Zig Rubel.
So I have a few slides that I wanted to try and set up discussion around why failure is important to the CIDCI. And there's a quote by Osran Varel, who was or is the author of Think Like a Rocket Scientist, which I think sets up our curiosity towards failure appropriately. I think many of us who are on the call today value critical thinking and creativity, but we're hesitant to think big. We're reluctant to dance with uncertainty and afraid of failure. And there's a couple of video clips that I just want to share. They're short, but I think they set up the discussion that our two speakers are going to have appropriately.
So I put it in, and Theodore Roosevelt comes up, and a quote comes up. And I read it, and this is what it says. It's a quote from a speech that he gave in the early 1900s at the Sorbonne, and a lot of people call it the Man in the Arena speech. And this is the passage that changes my life. It's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done it better. The credit belongs to the person who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with blood and sweat and dust, who, at the best, in the end, knows the triumph of high achievement, and who, at worst, if he fails daring greatly.
I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is why I succeed.
Given the options, I prefer to learn from success, which I think is a great comeback. And so I guess I was curious in general, what do you think of the Silicon Valley mantra, fail fast, fail often, or as Esther Dyson says, always make new mistakes, as if failure is the crucible of learning? I'm curious if you had any further thoughts on that and that maybe off-the-cuff comment you made out there.
Well, I mean, there are many that sort of, I mean, I think there's like some entropic basis for this. Like there are many more ways to fail than to succeed. So you have to explore, I mean, particularly like for a rocket, there's like 1,000 ways to think and fail and like one way it can work. So you could have a lot of rocket failures to explore all the ways in which it could fail. But I do think that one great thing about Silicon Valley is that failure is not a big stigma. So it's like if you try hard and it doesn't work out, that's okay. Like you can learn from that and do another company, and it's not a big deal. And I think that's really one of the great things about Silicon Valley.
Interesting.
So I wanted to start out because I think our two speakers are going to talk a lot about what is failure. I wanted to talk about what failure is not. And failure is not meeting what I'm calling table stakes. And table stakes is defined as the minimum offering on any product before it's considered purchasable by the customer. So the reason why we're putting this slide up there is that CIDCI is not promoting something like the horrible event in Surfside, Florida, as an acceptable mode of failure. But when looking at building collapse and structural failure, our industry is actually at what we call Six Sigma, where there's 6 zeros of not failing. So I think in that sense, we are successful in meeting our requirements. But we do want to spend the time to talk about that it's okay to fail, and it's okay to experiment, and it's really okay to look for better ways. And this is a quote that I found when we first started talking about the session that a former Starbucks exec posted on LinkedIn, and how he still has a product that he created that didn't make it to market because it didn't meet the table stakes of the need of the customer. And the last quote that I'll show is Thomas Watson, who was the first president of IBM and really the father of the company, his quote is, "The best pathway to success is to double your rate of failure." And again, it's the right kind of failure. So with that, I am going to introduce our speakers that are going to talk about what is good failure. And first, I would like to introduce Dr. Samuel West. Dr. West is a psychologist with a PhD in organizational science. He considers himself an irreverent researcher. He is also the curator of the Museum of Failure, a collection of failed products and services from around the world. Every item provides unique insight into the risky business of innovation. Joining him is Dr. Sara Beckman. She is the Earl F. Chet Faculty Fellow at UC Berkeley Haas School of Business, where she has inspired hundreds of business leaders. She leads the CIDCI online innovation lab.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. In the next 15 minutes, I'll try my best to introduce the Museum of Failure and in some kind of a comprehensible way. The museum was started back in 2017 where I lived in Sweden at the time. And the whole reason I started the Museum of Failure was because in my work, both in the research on how organizations can create climates that are conducive to innovation, and in my consulting business, it became more and more clear that there was no lack of methods or lack of creativity or innovation consultants. The biggest obstacle was that there's a fear of failure and that people go to great lengths to avoid all the unpleasantness associated with failure. So I started the Museum of Failure. The whole point of the museum, this is from Sweden, this one is from Hollywood Boulevard, and this one is, the most fantastic one was in Shanghai in China. But the whole purpose of the museum is to drive home 2 points. One is that we need to accept failure if we want any kind of progress, definitely if we want any kind of innovation. You can't separate innovation from failure. And the second point, which is maybe not as public, it's more innovation nerdy, and that is that organizations, they really need to improve their learning from failure. Like Elon Musk said there in the short video, Silicon Valley they're great at accepting failure, but unfortunately, they're not much better than anyone else at actually learning from failure. The last slide about the museum, it's toured the world, and the most popular part of the museum is the pop-up museum, which is for different events, conferences, corporate events, whatnot, where a small part of the museum is presented as a pop-up for a day or a week. So the whole ambition with the museum is to present products, services, all kinds of innovations that in one way or another failed, to really drive home the point that we need to start learning. We need to start discussing and learning from these failures rather than sweeping them under the carpet, which is what most companies do. So I was preparing this talk, and I shouldn't have put this in here because this is I don't really know that much about this product, but it's the newest donation to the Museum of Failure. This is a AmaBrush. It's a revolutionary toothbrush. So you stick the whole thing in your mouth, turn it on for about 10 seconds, and it's supposed to totally brush your teeth, clean your teeth in 10 seconds. That's great. That's like a fantastic innovation. The only problem is it doesn't work. So your teeth are still dirty after using it. There was one reviewer who said, I've used it 27 times now and my teeth are still dirty. Kind of defeats the whole purpose of a toothbrush. On the other hand, it's a great demonstration of, hey, somebody had to take a risk here and test it out. Another one that I just got in is from Amazon. I'm surprised I didn't know about this one earlier. This is the Amazon Dash button. So there's little devices that are connected to your Wi-Fi that you stick like on the wall or in your cupboard or wherever you store your stuff. And then when you need some more Heineken beer, all you do is you press that button in your beer cabinet or the fridge, and then Amazon automatically orders another case of beer and has it sent to your house. This never worked out for Amazon and they killed the project, but it's one example of an innovation that made it to market but didn't work out. I'll go through a few other examples from the museum, and I purposely did not select any examples from the construction industry because it's much easier to learn from examples that are from completely different fields than your own. When I present architectural failures at an architect conference, all I get are feedback of, oh no, that's not right, and the nuances. It's easier to learn from failures that are not from your area of expertise. This is the Sony Betamax is one of the iconic sort of grandfathers here at the museum. It's some of you are old enough like me to remember the video cassette recorder. Well, Sony was the best. They were the first to market. It was the best quality. They had everything. They were the biggest company. They had everything going for them. And then a small competitor launched a cheaper, lower quality version of this technology called VHS, but they were smarter and they formed alliances with the movie industry at Hollywood studios and had more content. So it took 10 years. The war went on for 10 years, but Sony lost despite having all the advantages. Lesson learned from Sony Betamax. Being first to market doesn't matter if somebody else is smarter than you. VHS was smarter. Another iconic example, artifact from the museum is the Apple Newton. It was the first sort of, now we take these things for granted, but in 1993, the Apple Newton was a revolutionary, extremely revolutionary high-tech technology. There was no keyboard, you just used a stylus to enter data. The problem is that the character entry software, recognition software didn't work. So everyone had a field day making fun of the Apple Newton as a useless piece of high-tech, a useless high-tech device. In fact, the word Newton became synonymous to innovation failure in the tech field. Big embarrassment for Apple. But they should have learned from this mistake because the engineers said, don't launch this product. The technology is not mature, but the marketing department and leadership said, we're going to launch it anyway. So you would think a great company like Apple would learn from their mistakes. Well, it doesn't seem that they really do learn that much from their mistakes. In 2012, you definitely remember this when Apple launched the Apple Maps and the whole fiasco surrounding how they didn't want their users to use Google Maps, launched their own version with the results, as you can see. These are the more sensational failures in Apple Maps. But they eventually said, okay, guys, to their customers, okay, Apple Maps doesn't work. We're sorry, go ahead and use Google Maps because it was such an embarrassment. Same thing there. The engineers are like, hey, it's not mature. Let's not launch it. They did it anyway. Another sort of iconic failure at the museum is New Coke. Some of you might remember this from the mid-'80s when Coca-Cola decided to freshen up the classic recipe of Coca-Cola. The results were people were going crazy saying, don't change my Coke. It was a public relations fiasco for Coca-Cola. And that's why today you see still on the cans, when they realized their mistake, they relaunched the Coca-Cola Classic. They had the Coca-Cola 2 and the Coca-Cola Classic, and they relaunched it with classic taste Coca-Cola. And you still see that on the cans today. This is taught in any sort of MBA program, the classic screw up from Coke with the messing with the brand, which they thought they understood, but they didn't understand it. Coincidentally, Coke actually made a lot of money off of this mistake because people hamstered Coke thinking that the Coke they loved wouldn't be available in the future. Ironic twist. Here's another new one we have at the museum. It's Facebook Libra. Facebook 2019, they decided to launch their own cryptocurrency or to start printing their own money. And of course, nobody's heard of it today because it didn't actually take off. It was a fiasco from the beginning. They haven't given up. They've changed the name to sort of rebrand it, but it's not really, nothing's really happening there either. And one of the things about the museum, one of the feedbacks that we get at the museum is, sure, these huge companies, Apple, Facebook, Google, they're big respective companies in their fields. Even the big guys fail when they try new things. So it's not about making fun of these companies. It's showing that in order to sustain innovation, they have to keep pushing the limit. This isn't going to kill Facebook, a botched cryptocurrency project. It's a way for Facebook to keep on top of things. Google also here with Google Glass, which I remember when this was launched, I so wanted to have a Google Glass. I signed up to be sort of a pioneer or whatever they called the VIPs who got to try the Google Glass. I wasn't selected. Happily so, because they were super expensive and completely useless. They were cool technology, but there was no applications for Google Glass. And more importantly, at the time, privacy issues made anybody who wore Google Glass, the New York Times called Google Glass users glass holes, because people hated the fact that they were being spied on with the built-in camera and Wi-Fi connection. Cool design, but it didn't think about the actual practicality of it. Coincidentally, or parentheses, today Google Glass is sold as an enterprise version. It's very successful for warehouse workers and auto mechanics. Here's one of my favorite in its simplicity. Beckman for her, the French multinational conglomerate, launched a pointlessly gendered product in, notice the year, it's 2011, it's not 1811. So the idea here is that women need their own pens because these regular pens, they're designed for men. So Bic launched this product, and the backlash was enormous. People, I mean, customer reviews on Amazon are hilarious to read. Like, finally, we women, we got pens. Finally, we can stop taking dictation notes from our male bosses. We can have our own life. We can go to school. We can think. You might be wondering what's so special about the Bic pen for her. What makes the pen specifically designed for women? Several things. One, you can see the colors. It comes in colors that women like. Pink and purple. It has glitter, of course, because every woman wants glitter. And most importantly, because women make, on average, twice the salary of men, Bic pen for hers costs twice as much as a regular Bic pen. Great product here from Bic. The lessons learned from this failure, or new product development failure from Bic, is to listen to everybody on your team. Was there no woman on the Bic design team or marketing team? Was there nobody there who said, hey guys, this is a stupid idea, let's not do it? Apparently not. Design, this is my favorite example of design failure. If you're interested in design, you've probably stumbled across this one. It's a tea kettle. It's a water boiling kettle that's super designed by Philippe Starck, made by Alessi in Italy. The design is beautiful, but it's an example of where design triumphed function. So the water kettle is absolutely worthless as a water kettle. You can't see how much water is in it because there's no way to see. You can't, when you boil water and you pour it into your teacup, you get scalded by this steam that comes out of the opening there. And what was the other one? It gets hot, and it's notoriously difficult to use, even if you do manage to use it safely. Alessi says, it's my most beautiful mistake. I like that attitude. Don't try to hide it, own up to it. And some fun ones at the end here. This is probably the one people get a good laugh out of, with Colgate frozen dinners. So apparently in the 80s, Colgate tried to make some frozen entrees, some frozen dinners using their brand name as high brand name recognition. It didn't go very well. So this is a replica that we had made for the museum because we couldn't find the originals. My favorite is this one. I think it's a fun way to end our little tour. Mid-90s, Procter & Gamble launched the Olestra. It's a zero calorie fat substitute. So as you can see on the can, it says 100% satisfaction, but 0% guilt. So Olestra was like the biggest thing. It was the holy grail of food science. And Procter & Gamble, they did all their tests. They did everything right. I mean, they're a big consumer product company. They know what they're doing. There was this one, so what, you could eat all the potato chips, you can eat all the junk food you want without getting fat. This is like the perfect food innovation. There was only one small little problem. Olestra caused explosive diarrhea, which nobody wants associated with their food product. So that was the big failure there. Of course, the interest for Olestra just was destroyed overnight. And Olestra is one of my favorite because, you know, they did everything right, but they didn't quite understand that when people eat potato chips, they might eat whatever the twice or three times the recommended serving, which is apparently only 5 or 6 potato chips. But if you have a fat-free potato chip, you eat the whole can, definitely, as anybody would, and that's when you got the diarrhea. So ending, see how I'm doing on time there. So what organizations need to be aware of is that there's a lot of talk about failure. It's cool to fail. It's cool to be open to failure and accept failure. I mean, everyone's trying to emulate Silicon Valley. The problem is that the reality is that even if the CEO is on stage talking about the importance of embracing failure, the reality is that the majority of organizations are hypocrites about it. You say failure is something that we need to accept. We want to have a blame-free culture, et cetera, et cetera. But in reality, people are still penalized for failure. And this is something that's the organizational cultures that need to be changed. My favorite researcher in this regard is definitely Amy Edmondson. Her 20-year plus research on psychological safety is probably the most exciting sort of concept within organizational psychology right now, as far as I'm concerned, because it addresses, the concept is about the feeling within a team, a confidence that you can speak up, you can take a social risk, you can admit your failure, you can be dumb, you can ask a dumb question, and you feel safe within that team that you won't be punished for that. And the research suggests very strongly that psychological safety is the key in developing and maintaining high-performing, innovative teams. If you're interested, definitely Google Amy Edmondson and the psychological safety concept. Yeah, I think I was worried that I would miss time. I am smack there on 15 minutes. Yeah, this is Museum of Failure. We're opening in Minneapolis next month, and then opening in the San Francisco Bay Area, either in January or February. I haven't got those dates confirmed yet. If we do, I hope to see you there.
Great to see everybody here. Thanks for joining the conversation. So I'm going to follow on Samuel's list of failures and try to highlight at least two of what I think about failures of failure, failing, improperly failing, if you will, in the organization. And I wanted to open with, I teach a lot of stuff that people would call design thinking. I call it problem framing and solving. And in fact, I embed that in learning theory. So to Samuel's point, this notion that we're always in cycles of learning is what underpins quality management, design thinking, systems thinking, scientific method. And so understanding the notion that we have to be in a learning process all the time, I think is at the core of failure. But I had a student once come up to me in class and said, okay, you said we have to be free of our fear of failure, but how do I pick the failures I should make? And at first I thought, oh my gosh, yet another product of our school system where everybody's used to getting A's on their standardized tests. And then I began to realize that that it wasn't a totally bad question. So what I want to talk about is sort of two things, and they arise in a bunch of the examples that Samuel put out there. The first is that the better you know your customer, the less likely you are to fail. And Samuel said that over and over in some of his examples that he gave, right? So this research, I've never looked at it prior to the mid-1970s. So let's say we have 50 years of research on failed products in the marketplace. And every single one of those studies has the challenge that failed innovators had less understanding of their user needs. Now, that's not the only failure mode, right? Successful innovators pay more attention to the marketing, to performing their product development work more efficiently. They make more effective use of outside technology and scientific advice. Maybe that toothbrush thing could have used more scientific advice to understand why it might not actually take the mittens off your teeth. And they are generally more senior, so have greater authority than their counterparts. So there's a list of failure modes, but it's striking that a lack of understanding of customer and user needs tops that list in every case. So the challenge that we have, and I think this is beginning to change today because COVID has pushed us into a place where being product-centric instead of customer-centric is less and less possible. The world is moving too quickly. Technology is changing things too quickly. And so a lot of organizations are beginning to say, what does it look like to be customer-centric? And there's a growing literature on that. So I don't know if, Samuel, you would have called the glass Heinz bottle a failure, but it wasn't at some level, but it certainly, some people didn't think it was fun to spend their dinner trying to pound the backside of the Heinz bottle in order to get ketchup out of it. So it shifted in a sense to being a more customer-centric, easier to use product, even if it lost the charm of the original glass bottle, which by the way is the same with Coca-Cola bottles. Cultural shifts change what we do with our products. And so one of the quotes we hear versions of from the product managers in our product management program is that we seem much more focused on how we're going to make another $20,000 than on improving the journey of our existing customers. And so to me, this is kind of at the heart of what customer centricity looks like and de-risking the solutions we put into the market looks like. So Samuel brought up Google Glass. Their original target market was developers. And they thought that the developers would figure out that the potential end use. But their marketing looked like this. They put models on runways and had them wear Google Glass. So they hadn't really thought about the ultimate end use market and hadn't defined it. It's a classic Google play, by the way, that we make things that everyone can use. And so it was hard for them to think about a beachhead market or a target market. Ultimately, of course, they realized that what Google Glass is best used for. So they got a job to be done. They figured out a problem to be solved for the customer. is anyone who needs hands-free access to help, right? So machine shops, as Samuel said, they use them in doctor's offices. My parents' doctor uses it all the time for capturing information during visits. So this was a classic case of everybody will want these, even though there was somebody on the team who said he wore them out on the street and people just looked at him like he was strange, but he couldn't convince the team that that would be the case, right? But it doesn't look so strange in this kind of environment to be wearing Google Glass. You're using it with intent, with a purpose, and so some of those other challenges go away. So customer centricity, and Samuel had A.G. Lafley was on that Harvard Business Review cover as somebody who learns from failures. He was the CEO of Procter & Gamble twice. But one of the stories I love about him is that he spends a lot of time with customers. So he goes out and visits primarily women, because a lot of the consumer products they sell, at least historically, have targeted women. So talking to them about their choice of laundry detergents, or the body lotion, the collection of body lotions they have on the shelf and what each one is used for. So he spent a lot of time himself developing empathy for customers and users. And that signals the rest of the organization that the people, the end users, the customers are the people we're serving, and understanding them is important. By the way, Lafley uses the same, what we call ethnographic research techniques with his employees. When he first started as CEO, he would go around and talk to the employees and ask them how they were doing and what their job was like, as opposed to going in and going, I'm the new CEO, I'll have these expectations of you. So customer centricity really is modeled at the top of the organization. But we have a couple of challenges. One is we're not investing enough in the collection of quantitative data. So you all work in an industry where there's increasing amounts of data from job sites, huge amounts of data, right? Somebody was telling me the other day about the robots that go around and install, I don't remember what it was, screws and things in the floor. Anyway, you have a lot of data about behaviors that are happening on the front lines. The key is that you have to actually collect all that data in some place. People call that a data lake, I guess. Organize it, analyze it, extract insights from it, and then give access to the people in the organization to be able to use that data in a meaningful way. So the first notion here is really thinking about not just data collection for product design, but data collection really to understand customer behaviors, what they're doing, why they're doing, where they're doing it. And then there's qualitative research as well, right? So qualitative research is get out of the building, as they say in Lean Startup. It's walk a mile in someone else's shoes, as we talk about in design thinking. And this is where I'm trying to create both cognitive and emotional empathy. I'm trying to understand how the customer thinks and how the customer feels. And I'm trying to get to why. So any number of the products that Samuel presented, you could argue that there was a lack of understanding of how customers would feel, for example, and having their classic Coke taken away from them, right? Or the reaction to Colgate on my lasagna box. So getting underneath the why, and at the heart of this is that people make sense to themselves, right? So they might do something weird, like put their workmate's stapler in Jell-O. If you haven't seen this episode of The Office, you have to watch it, because it's really all about how little of the office is mine. And so my stapler is mine and I don't want it stolen, and I don't want it to, so it speaks to office culture when you understand that kind of thing. And then what we have to do is we have to somehow embed this stream of future customer experiences into our roadmap. So we tend to roadmap products, features, technologies, instead of road mapping what are the customer experiences we want to create over time, and how does that drive our choices of features and functions. So Samuel talked a lot about teams that were just kind of throwing, Newton was throwing features into the marketplace. without clarity around what's the connection to the customer outcome we're trying to achieve. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is learning to experiment in a more formal and explicit way. So Stefan Tomke's written a couple of books about experimentation. And he says, first of all, that a relentless organizational focus on success makes true experimentation all too rare. So net promoter score without underlying understanding of customer satisfaction characteristics forces us to focus on something that doesn't help us with experimentation. And then because experiments that reveal what doesn't work are frequently deemed failures, we might delay tests or not carry them out or label them as verification or validation, implying that only finding out what works is the primary goal of the experiment. So I think, again, Samuel highlighted cases where that would be true. So even when you know your customer well at some level, you have to de-risk your products or offerings by testing them. So Shure knew their customers very well, SM58 microphones. They knew their customers really well. They hung out with them all the time. And they realized that they were losing their hearing because of their products, right? These wedges on the stage. And so they developed hearing aid looking things and put them out there and said, we can help you so that you'll be able to hear better. And the word came back, you've got to be kidding me. I'm not somebody who wears hearing aids. But when they figured out that it would allow the performers to be able to move around the stage more, be able to monitor their own personal sound more so they could hear what they wanted to hear, and they repositioned them as personal stage monitors, the product took off. So this is a case where they thought they knew something that their customers should need. They took a version of the product out there. They found out that that positioning wasn't what the customers wanted, and they repositioned the product so that it could be a success. So testing, and Samuel mentioned this notion, or actually I think it was Zig who talked about the sort of notion of minimum viable products, you can call it that. But if you think about a minimum viable product, what am I testing with a cupcake? I'm testing taste, but I'm not testing all the kinds of other things, all the kinds of other things that I might care about with a wedding cake. Where does it fit? How does it match my decor, et cetera? So we have to get beyond just saying, oh, let's crank out a minimum viable product and say, what is it that we want to learn about the product, about the behavior change we're trying to create in the customer, about the context into which our product or solution is going to go. So am I asking people to change their behaviors, like eat bars instead of drinking smoothies? I can pay them to eat bars for breakfast for a week and then talk to them about it and figure out what's it going to take to drag them over that divide. If I'm creating changes in infrastructure like self-driving cars, I can create a costume that looks like a car seat, put it onto a person, let them drive the car around, and watch how people react to the car. So I don't even need the autonomous car to be able to do that kind of test. This is Clorox. Clorox wanted to figure out if people would buy doggy pee pads under the Fresh Step brand name. So they got a bunch of doggy pee pads, they put them at Amazon, they got bags to put them in, they printed labels, and then they put all this up on 1221 Market, which is an Amazon site that is a Clorox product test site. They could change the quantities, they could change the prices, they could change the labels, and they could figure out the answers to branding, pricing, quantities, all that kind of stuff, which were things that sat around the product as opposed to things that were the product itself. So the core message here is you have to think about where the risks lie in the products we're designing, and then run experiments purposely designed to understand whether those risks are real or how I might reduce them. So I would argue that maybe BIC should have done a little bit more of put this stuff out there in the marketplace in some version and see what the reaction is. Ditto with Colgate. It's not very hard to test branding of products and figure out what people will think. So important when you're doing testing is to design, CIA does this all the time, the analysis of competing hypotheses. So you're not just looking for validation or introducing bias. And failing early is way less expensive than failing in the marketplace. So to the extent that you're understanding your customers well, SunPower, for example, learned that its installers weren't just plumbers, but that they felt that they were on the vanguard of installing of solar power. So know your customers well, in this case, SunPower and its installers, and then run experiments to figure out, in this case, they're trying to figure out if they helped the installers be able to better install or more efficiently install the solar panels, they might do a better job. So know your customers and then run experiments to test your riskiest assumptions. And then in my mind, you're making the so-called right failures in the answer to my student's question. So Zig, I'll leave it at that and turn it back to you and open the floor for questions, huh?
We had a few questions kind of set out that I had shared with you. And the first one, if you're both comfortable answering, is what was your most valuable professional failure?
Samuel's is getting off mute.
Yeah. I hate when other people do that, and then I just did it myself. Yeah, I'm maybe not like the most valuable, but definitely the most entertaining was that when I got the idea for Museum of Failure back in 2016, I was so happy with myself for having such a fantastic idea. So, you know, when I get a good idea, I go and register the domain so nobody else can take it. So I go and I register museumoffailure.com, and I'm like, I can't believe it wasn't taken. I'm so happy. I went and had a beer, and I was like, yeah, this is great. And then I looked at the invoice again, and it said, congratulations, you know, those $12 just bought you museumoffailure.com. So I was like the only museum founder and curator in the world who can't spell the word museum. So that was my first taste of failure for this project.
Okay.
We've made t-shirts out of them, so it's turned out okay.
So where my mind went when you asked the question, Zig, was to something I tell my students about all the time now. So it stuck with me, which was we developed a data set while I was at HP. I won't drag you through the long story of how we did that, that showed a cost volume curve for placing parts on printed circuit board assemblies. And I thought, and HP's sites at the time, this is a long time ago, were all above the curve. So I go in and I present this, like, look, we have to do something about this. This is not right. And it took me a year to the point where somebody said to me, wait a second, does that mean that we have 2 engineers at each one of 50 printed circuit board assembly sites working on the process? And that if we consolidated, we could have like 20 engineers working on this process and the process would be really amazing. And I said, well, yes. Meanwhile, I've been arguing about cost. So the big learning for me was pay attention to my audience, my target customer, in that case, senior management, where they weren't about cost because that's not what HP's game was at the time. But cool engineering and high quality really struck a chord with them. So that's always stuck with me. I banged my head against the wall for a year trying to get them to say, yeah, we shouldn't be having all these sites. And that wasn't the right message.
So that somewhat ties into the next question, which is, do you think that success or metrics for success in some ways reduces the exploration of failure?
Definitely. I mean, it's not only a fear of failing, it's also somewhat this fear of, I mean, so it's not even the fear of that horrible failure. It's even a we're limited by the fear of not succeeding. Does that make any sense? Like we're so focused on that we have to, if it's money, that's the metric, then that's the metric of which we measure the success. And then sort of you get like this narrow field vision towards that goal without exploring, what is it called in the CIA? What did you call it, Sarah?
Analysis of competing hypotheses.
Competing hypotheses. Like, yeah, if people would just be willing to explore those as well, they would be, the outcomes would be much more innovative. There's an interesting study. I don't know how nerdy, can we be full nerd here or?
Go for it.
I can't throw the references because I can't remember, but the experiment was fascinating. So simple. They asked a group of, it was architects, engineers, a group of engineers to solve an open-ended sort of problem. And then they asked a group of sort of artistic, non-engineer sort of designers, art people, whatever, less focused people, to solve the same. Sorry about that. To solve the same problem, and then they recorded these two groups, and the engineers were super good at, like, they quickly identified the problem, and they spent 15% of their time focusing on what's the problem, okay, and then the rest of the time designing an elegant, well-functioning, perfect solution. The non-engineers spent more than 70% of their time arguing about what the problem was, and who and why they should be doing it, etc. And then they quickly threw together a couple of suggestions in their remaining time. The output of the non-engineers measured in metrics of innovation or creativity was infinitely higher. So, well, the engineers had an elegant solution. It wasn't a very good one, but the other ones with a more creative approach had rougher prototypes but better solutions. And I sometimes use that sort of example of that, or that experiment when I find myself holding the hands of leadership, saying it's okay when it feels like you're wasting time exploring other options before you decide on a solution. Does that make any sense? Like it doesn't feel productive to be arguing about the stupid problem is. We have the brief. Well, it does make sense to spend some time arguing about it and having some fun with it.
So one of the things that we've done research on, MBA students, engineering students, as well as liberal arts students of various types. And both MBA and engineering students tend to test out as what are called converging learners, which means they're intent on getting a solution, which is different than people who are what we call assimilating learners, who want to kind of figure out what the problem is, or diverging learners who just want to go learn and might drive you crazy because they're busy learning stuff. But this notion of finding the right balance between what I call sense making, understanding the problem, and solution making, trying to come up with the answer, I think is what you're talking about in some ways, Samuel. I'm going to take a little bit different twist on this question, Zig. So Net Promoter Score, which I alluded to briefly, is kind of a big deal these days. Lots of companies use it. It's statistically a totally bizarre choice of representing what's good and what's not good. And but it seems to be a key driver. I mean, listen, when the people come to fix my internet or my phone, what's the last thing they say to you before they leave? You're going to get a call. Please make sure you give me a 9 or a 10, because they'll say it's for the company, but it's really going to land on me, right? These scores are being used. Here's the bottom line. They have nothing to do with the outcomes customers want to achieve. So they give me absolutely no information about whether or not I'm actually helping my customers achieve the outcomes they set out to achieve. And CMG put sort of a question about this in the in the chat, right? So if the outcomes I want to achieve are carbon use reduction, I probably also have cost somewhere on that list. I want to have some aesthetic outcome. I'm thinking about buildings now, right? So I've got a number of outcomes I want to achieve as the owner. And so those outcomes need to thread their way through the process. And Net Promoter Score doesn't, maybe indirectly is a proxy for achieving those outcomes, but it doesn't really give me information that's helpful. So then I'm going to spin on, ooh, if I put banner ads on, my Net Promoter Score goes up. I might be pissing off any number of people who don't want to see banner ads, but hey, that's not. So I think we have to do a better job of connecting our metrics to the outcomes customers want to achieve, and then we have a different way of seeing into that space.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think to answer the question about the unit of assessment of failure, I would just add that the table stakes of what the product or the solution is providing to the customer isn't being met. And yes, making money is definitely part of it, but even with the patents that the question identified, if there's no value to the customer, there's no value to the idea.
Yeah.
I just want to add one more thing to the question here in the chat about the success involves timing and perception and reception fashion. But I mean, failure is it's not binary. It's not yay or nay. It's always sort of messy, because measured in one way, money, which it usually is for companies, then yeah, something can be a failure. I have the Segway in the museum. So the Segway was a horrible commercial failure. It didn't meet any of the expectations for the investors of the company. So measured in money, it was a horrible fiasco. And I get some phone calls and emails from people saying, from people with mobility or disabilities, saying, "Hey, don't piss on the Segway. It's a fantastic. It has changed my life as a disabled person. I now I can go where I want to when I want to with dignity, standing up." And I thought about it. Like, it's an extreme sort of example where it's a complete failure as a commercial product, but a fantastic success for a group of people. And that's not measured in money, measured in quality of life. It really drives home that failures, the measure of failure is always contextual, always.
Yeah, I agree. So the next question has to do with, what would you say is a good byproduct of failure? And the example that I had suggested was maybe a mishap report that the FAA might issue when there's an accident, and they try and understand, oh, these are the causes that may have caused this crash. But are there other benefits of failure?
To me, this goes back to the core question of, do we learn from them or not? And I think by definition, if you're going to do testing of competing hypotheses, you're going to fail, particularly if you do mutually exclusive, completely exhaustive hypotheses. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there about this, but that then by definition, one of those hypotheses has to fail, one or more, right? And so failure is inherent in a sense in the design, right? But I think maybe the mishap report conversation that I remember had to do with Kaiser learning about this, which isn't quite the same as the FAA. And let me see if I can make a connection. I'm not sure I can, but you know those the things on the wall in a lot of places like factories and stuff where they say 4,000 days without an accident. Actually, it's never that long. 325 days without an accident, right? So what happens over time is people don't want to report accidents because they don't want to be the person who breaks the trend. And so they likened it to playing Jenga. Like, you don't want to be the person who pulls out the last block and the whole thing falls over. So I think, to your point about the FAA and mishap reports, the question is it okay to show up on one of those because it's being used in a constructive way to change something about how we fly airplanes? Or do you never want to show up there, in which case failure is implied as a bad thing? And so for me, that report on workplace injuries was really interesting, because it's like, wait a second, of course I don't want to be the one who says, whoops, I slipped and fell this morning. We're going back to zero. So Samuel, what do you think?
And no, I just want to echo what you said about the learning, because I wouldn't even call it a side effect of failure. It should be the primary goal in failure. Just, I mean, this is the same for organizations or just for us as individuals. I mean, you fail, it hurts. Your prestige, for a company, it costs money. What if you don't learn from it, then you totally wasted it. So, and this is also ties into why are we so afraid of this failure, or why are we afraid of failure in general, and why are we so reluctant to talk about it? It hurts to talk about it, but why do if there's such a learning to be gained from discussing it and trying to dissect it, why don't we do that more often?
So the last question I wanted to touch on, and this may be a bit odd because I'm asking two non-industry specific or two professionals not really in the industry, but do you see design, bid, build as perpetuating failure, in the sense that you have many different players all coming to the arena and only one person walking away with the trophy, so to speak?
I don't even know what you're asking a question about. So Sarah, you have to answer this one.
So Zig, I think that's a really interesting question. My first thought as I was looking at the question had to do with this question of, where does learning happen? And I think you've similarly framed it, but how do you maximize learning at the project level and at the industry level? So at the project level, and this is related a little bit to CMG's question, the more voices I have at the table, well, not more, the more diversity in perspectives and heuristics I have represented at the table. So it's not necessarily, if I have 18 people who are all PhD industrial engineers, then my being one of them, then we'll all have a conversation about the same process or whatever, our stopwatches. So you got to have diversity at the table. Now, if diversity at the table means I bring more people through this iterative process of design, build, well, that's the second point I was going to make, design, bid, build, then I have a better chance at having more innovation happen in that group. Does that make sense? So that's the first thing I would say about what you just said. The second thing is just how iterative design, bid, build sounds like a line. And it needs to be a circle or a diverge, converge, diverge, converge. It needs to be non-linear, because by definition, these are non-linear activities. And so I can't remember the pictures I've looked at of the design, bid, build process, and if they're all drawn linearly or whether they draw them with more curves somewhere in there. But so those would be the two challenges that to me would then say I promote failure by not taking into account a sufficient number of perspectives early in the process, or I promote failure by not being willing to engage in iterative learning as I go through the process itself. So I don't know if it promotes failure. It's
Can I just ask?
the flip side, maybe it doesn't promote enough failure.
But do you think it, Sarah, do you think it promotes, I mean, do you think it promotes learning from failure, or is it something that, I mean,
so
the
that's sort of what
structure
I'm
of
trying
that process?
to, and this Zig would have to answer that question, right? Because I have superficial understanding of all these different processes, but that's the question, right? How does knowledge from build come back into design, right? Or how does failure knowledge from the industry get brought to the table in the first place?
Well, I'm just excited that Samuel didn't even know what design bid build was. So the fact that there are people
oh no, am I going to find out now?
There are people out there that know that there's a better way or a different way than design bid build. Gives me hope. So I just want to go back to CMG's question, because I'm not sure if we answered the heart of the question about ideas of generating methodologies and showing results in greater innovation. Do you feel like we've?
Yeah, we didn't really talk about that. That popped up.
Yeah. Okay.
Recently. Yeah. So I'm going to throw two notions out here. The first one is, it turns out that we're not actually that bad at coming up with out-of-the-box ideas. But the failure modes are either in the framing of the concept generation process itself, or in the concept selection process. So we go out, we've talked to a bunch of customers, we're in that design process of figuring out what we're going to do. And we come up with this new frame. Huggies pull-ups came from a new frame. Kimberly Clark used to think about diapers as waist control bandages. Parents didn't think about them that way. And so the new frame was, we can support parents with, for example, toilet training, which, why would we want to do that? We sell diapers. So this new frame had to be brought into the concept generation. So the first failure mode, CMG, is that if I stick with my old frames, we make waist control bandages, I'll just keep trying to get patents on odor control and absorption and weave of fabric and these kinds of things, right? So you can't have a good idea generating session if you don't, we call it loading, if you don't bring to it some meaningful conception of what it is you're trying to do differently. I'm trying to think of an example in your industry, Zig, and I'm struggling here, but a different conception. I suppose 3D printing, that's a technology, but there's a different conception of how I might build, design, bid, build, and all the different conceptions of processes. But I have to bring that alive. Then I have to load the process with information about technologies, about peoples, about trends, and so the idea generation is happening. I like to think of it in a room that's covered with prompts. That trigger me to think in different ways. So IDEO and the design firms have, I forget what they call the boxes. They have boxes just full of stuff that you can go to and kind of go through, and there's failed products and successful products. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, we aren't afraid to put ideas on the wall. We are afraid to choose one that has novelty. So we vote ourselves back to average. And often we vote ourselves back to the old frame because we're comfortable with it. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, CMG, to idea. Brainstorm, there's Thinker Toys, there's Scamper, there's thousands of brainstorming techniques. But to me, the key is you got to load that process with good framing, and then you have to make sure when you're converging that you don't lose novelty in the process. Converging is just as creative as diverging. because I'm mixing and matching all the stuff I've thrown on the wall, right? Samuel.
Yeah, we did a project a few years ago looking at different ideation, brainstorming, ideation methods, and there were techniques, and we tested them sort of to see, like, is there any difference there? And the results were very clear that it doesn't really matter what technique, or if you use any technique at all for the actual ideation, more than that everyone should be able to speak and that not only one voice is heard in the room. But the problem was selecting those, where you could have all these great ideas, and just like you said, the problem isn't the ideation, it's when it's time to move on and select which ideas to move forward with. That's when people took the safe bets. And that I would like to tie in with psychological safety again. We did some tests with trying to increase psychological safety in high-performing teams. One method we used was, it's going to sound crazy, but we used improv theater. So improv theater is a very fun way to, they don't explicitly say we're increasing psychological safety, but that's what they're doing in their sort of business improv classes. They teach people to help each other out and to be supportive of other people's ideas and actions, which is psychological safety. So we gave these teams 3 sessions of improv theater and measured the creative climate, their psychological safety afterwards. And it was quite interesting to see how just 3 sessions of a silly course on improv affected the team climate. And that's just one way. There's probably thousands of ways to do this. But if we feel like that we won't be penalized for selecting that idea with high novelty, then there's a greater likelihood that we'll do that. I also like Google's Moonshot Labs. I don't know how active they are today, but I saw a TED Talk a while ago with a description of their model, and it's like everybody with an idea gets money. Like, so we have an idea, here you go, here's whatever the lowest, here's $5,000 for your project. I'm making that up, I don't know the amounts. And then at the next team meeting, everyone tries to kill the project. And if your idea survives that round, you get $100,000. And then at the next meeting, they try to kill it again. And what's left is a bunch of crazy ideas that actually survive, which is true innovation.
I would only build on the improv notion. I think it's doing 2 things. One is it could make you sit in the shoes of the customer user, right? Because you're playing it out. So that's bringing a frame, potentially bringing a different frame over. And then the second thing it forces is, because you have to be in the present, you have to build on the ideas of the person who goes before you, right? So there's some sort of fundamental, not only is it psychological safety, but it creates this other important dynamics for what you're doing in concept generation. Yeah, Google has a lot of methodologies at many levels, right? They've got their 20% time where everyone is supposed to work on a project. And then they've got Google X, they've got moonshots, they've got different things. The challenge at some level for them is commercializing. So
they're not that good at that.
Right? They're inside out in some ways in how they, we've got these great technologies, the self-driving car, but what should we do with Waymo? What is the purpose of it? Do we really want to be in the car business? Do we want to be in the mapping business? Do we want to be in so there's like meta challenges at market segmentation, right?
So I want to touch on Margie's question and tweak it a little bit, which is about the fear of failure and taking risks. And Sara, you had talked about really understanding your customer and speaking to your customer. And how would you relate the fear of failure and not talking to your customer about the fear of being wrong and wanting to be right?
So how would I connect talking to the customer to feeling
So
wrong?
where I'm going, and this is my hypothesis, and I could be wrong, that a lot of product development teams may not speak to the customer because they think they're right. And
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
if, as a design professional, I'm hired because I know what the client wants, but I still need to go and speak with them, even though I know what the client wants. And when I don't speak with them, that's when I fail.
Yeah. And the way that I like to position that, particularly for product managers, is to say, you're the expert in your product. You're the expert in your technology. You're the expert in your trade. You are not the expert in the life of your customer. And so that can help people separate. But I'm the expert. I'm the architect. I've been designing buildings forever, right? I mean, I know how to do my job. And you do, but you don't know how your customers live their lives. And that is even more true today because we've just gone through this massive disruption and we're all trying to design our own lives again. We're all trying to figure out how we want to live, learn, work in this world where, right, we don't have to go to the office or we don't have to. So what do you design for that? So getting out of the building is even more important now than ever, right? But I think it's easy to get into a conversation with the Googlers that I teach. We talk about the Google bubble, right? You can't just go into the cafeteria and talk with people because there are other Googlers and they all live in Workspace and in all the Google tools. So you have to go talk to real people out there like me using
normal people.
Normal. They wouldn't like you saying that.
So we have another question from CMG. Thank you, CMG, for asking great questions. Is the reason startups are innovative because established companies cannot change, like flying a turboprop and wanting to be a jet without landing?
Samuel, I'll let you go first.
No, I immediately think about some of the larger companies. I know Microsoft is probably one of the best examples of this. They're like, we realized, and I don't know which year, if this was 10 years ago or 15 years ago, they basically said, we realized we're too big to be innovative. We can't do it. So we just buy startups. Like there's an acceptance that, and Google is finding itself in the same position now, despite their awesomeness, that the size of that company, there's so much sort of the organizational structures that are required to keep that kind of company going, stifle innovation and the enthusiasm for it. And that's something startups don't have to deal with. So there is something about the size of a company or the maturity of a company. There's some interesting research on how individuals become more conservative as they get older, so protecting what is. But the interesting thing is that companies are just the same. The more mature, the older a company is, the more conservative they are, the more they want to protect what is rather than try and pioneer new areas. So that's, I mean, it's important to remind us of Google and Facebook is quite young, but Google, I mean, these companies are huge and they've been around a while, and in internet terms, they've been around forever. And yeah, just because it's online doesn't mean that it's innovative.
There's other research that I'll cite to support that. Rebecca Henderson, Dorothy Leonard Barton, both at Harvard, MIT, and this is decades old research. Rebecca's PhD thesis showed that the innovations, this was in the semiconductor equipment industry, that the primary innovations came from startups. They did not come from the incumbents, and it largely had to do, and they describe in more technical organizational behavior terms, the core rigidities inside the companies. So instead of core competencies, if you will, that they were leveraging, they had core rigidities that didn't allow them to change. And so to Samuel's point, this is why innovation labs in companies or acquisitions are sort of the way that companies are trying to drive innovation because they can't really always do it on their own. I mean, there are interesting examples like Cisco, where the whole company is just a collection of acquisitions, right? So it has modeled its entire history on that kind of behavior. But yeah, and you think about, Facebook has been huge in the news in the last couple of days for sure, but the last few weeks, because Wall Street Journal has been running the whistleblower papers for a while. And I do systems modeling of their situation, but you think about the virtuous flywheel of advertising income. And you can just picture how a whole conversation in a company can be about how do we get more data from more people so that we can more closely target ads, so we can sell more and charge more. And you can just picture that flywheel spinning away, and it being very hard to then say, well, wait a second, maybe 10 to 13-year-olds shouldn't be enticed to Instagram or whatever the case might be. So yeah, I think there's really challenges for big companies to figure this out.
Yeah. So I think we're almost at time, and I'd love to ask more questions, but I know that if we do, then I will fail. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Stuart if Stuart is ready to take over the responsibilities.
Thanks all. It's been a pleasure hanging out with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, certainly, this has just been really fantastic. So I think that's clearly the place to start with Dr. West and Sara Beckman. Thank you, and Zig, thank you for this. Has just been a really way beyond the word of informative. I think there are so many different ideas as to how innovation really comes out of the mistakes, but also just many other aspects of this. And so I'm only going to really try to summarize 2 or 3 big ideas that I heard, but there are so much more. So I really would absolutely tell everyone you should find this recording and spend more time with it to learn from it, not just from our industry, but just in general. It's just really entertaining about how we start to think about success and failure. So a couple, I guess they're words of wisdom. One is basically, it takes failure to succeed, meaning that we need to accept failure in order to succeed. And I think that's the key thing. I'm not sure if it takes failure, but it definitely needs to accept failure. And I think that's really, really important. And for all of us to learn as in our day-to-day lives as well. And so just in working with people about that. So I really think that's important. The museum of failure, Dr. West, I think we'll all be looking forward. I thought I read somewhere that it was going to be in Oakland sometime in the first of the year. I would really encourage all and we will do the CIDCI to make people aware of this. But I think that all the examples that came out in this conversation today of the big, large companies, I think you informed us together, Sara and Stephen, about large companies with huge failures that most of us don't really know about. But it really helped us in 2 ways, I think. One is just to be aware that, believe it or not, these companies do fail, and yet they still come out with successes. And so somehow they've figured out a way to balance that. I thought the insight, though, to the I'm going to say the startups might be more able to adapt, and maybe the large companies are branching out to startups in order to allow them to get to this innovative mode. And then finally, I think it was a really interesting question to bring it back to our design construction industry. And without getting into specifically project delivery types, I think Sara, you raised the need for, it really takes diversity, and I think diversity in this case meaning just lots of different thinkers, lots of different points of view to learn from each of those, and to then worry more about not having enough ideas meaning focus on getting the ideas, not focus on the process, not focus on the discipline, but really go deep into the ideas and listen. And so I think that was really huge. And hopefully for CIDCI, I think we can learn from that as well. So I really appreciate those insights. And then I think this whole thing of the safe path safety is just a huge, as an owner, and representing lots of different owners, safety is a big problem, meaning the need to be safe is, I'm not sure even how it's defined, but I think what you've brought out today is that really gets in the way of being innovative. And so I think we have a lot to learn. So thank you for very much for this, really, and Zig, thanks for moderating this. There was just such a great conversation here. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Margie, but I just wanted personally as well for CIDCI to thank you both very much. And Zig for carrying us for the last hour and a half. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. It's so great to have you. Tomorrow we'll be talking about the Bosch company's path towards innovation, how a 150-year-old company managed to reconfigure and rethink itself and its place within the market. So please join us at 8 a.m. Pacific time. And with that, I'd really like to thank Dr. West. We're looking forward to seeing your exhibition in a few months here in the Bay Area. Dr. Sara Beckman, always wonderful to have you join us. Thank you for all of your work today, as well as always on the Innovation Lab. That's such a transformative experience for the people that participate. Our wonderful moderator, Zig Rubel, thank you for holding all these bits together. And Katie Olson, thank you for doing everything magical behind the scenes for all of us. We'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning. And with that, thanks to all, stay safe, and we'll see you at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning.